Welcome. My name is Elizabeth Johnson, and this is From the Source, a show highlighting what is new and going on in your neighborhood. As co-president of the Manhasset Chamber of Commerce, I'm excited to host this show, which provides insight into our local villages and its representatives. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my first guest, former Senator Elaine Phillips. Phillips has been part of the North Shore community for nearly 25 years. She comes from humble beginnings and is a self-made woman. She's the first in her family to attend college and receive a degree, and knows what it means to be supported through the generous community efforts such as the Rotary Club International. She began her career on Wall Street and worked for such firms as MetLife, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. She got married and started a family, and in 1995 moved to Manhasset, where she became involved in the community and the schools. She was on the board of the Science Museum of Long Island and involved in local government as trustee for the village of Muncie Park and later Flower Hill. Phillips then ran and served as mayor of the incorporated village of Flower Hill for 6 years. In 2016, Phillips was asked to run for Senate as current incumbent Jack Martins was running for Congress. And in November, Phillips won the race, becoming New York State Senator representing the 7th District. Today, Phillips continues her work in the community. It is my great pleasure to welcome Elaine Phillips. Elaine, it's so wonderful for you to be here today.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled that you're here and that the people can see how well you're doing. And I wanted to know now what's going on.
So what's life after the Senate, right? So, I've had the opportunity really to continue to give back to my community in a little different forum. As way of background, I spent 20-odd years in the financial service industry and then left in 2009 to finish raising my girls. That's when I became the mayor and was SEA president, various other roles that I took on. So one of the things that we accomplished when I was mayor is we changed the investment manager for the Roslyn Fire Department's LOSAP. And what's a LOSAP? LOSAP is a supplemental pension plan that we offer our volunteer firefighters. So you think about it, we have firefighters that protect our communities day in and day out with no compensation. I mean, it really is unheard of in today's day and age, right? And the majority of our firefighters in New York State are volunteer fire departments. So in the early 90s, there was legislation that was passed to offer them a small supplemental pension plan. So it has to be managed appropriately. And we found, this was 4 or 5 years ago, that the Roslyn Fire Department was having some problems. So I chaired a committee with a representative from the village of East Hills and the controller at the time of the town of North Hempstead, who had really the majority interest in the Roslyn Fire Department. They just covered a small portion of Flower Hill, and we did our due diligence, put out an RFP, and we hired a firm right out of here, out of Great Neck. It's called Cap Trust, and they're actually the #1 ranked independent investment advisor in the United States. And it was their first plan like this to manage. So over the next couple years, I kept kind of watch over what they were doing, and they kept to watch over what I was doing also. So they graciously called me after the election and said, Elaine, do you want to have a cup of coffee? And so I said, sure. And they said, since the LOSAP for the Roslyn Fire Department, they've got several others across Long Island, and they said, we really don't have the time to focus on it. It would be a way for you to use your connections and stay involved with villages but most importantly, as a way of continuing to help and protect our volunteer fire departments. So that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of full circle, coming back into the financial service world, but at the same time still being able to work with our communities and do good things for our volunteer firefighters.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Really is, Elizabeth. It's great.
I'm so happy that, volunteer firefighters are always out there on the line 24/7, and, to get such compensation when they retire is like so important.
It really is. We did a firefighter appreciation. So we would go into the different fire departments and districts throughout the Senate every year, and I would bake cookies because it was something I was known for, and we'd bring a cake, and we'd ask the chiefs, could they just identify maybe 3 or 4 individuals that had done something above and beyond the call of duty in the prior year. And all the men and women would come out in full dress, and it was really a night to celebrate, a night to say thank you for protecting our communities. And their families would come out. We would look at the families and say, thank you for allowing your husband or wife or mother or father or son or daughter to protect our community. Because again, you don't, in today's day and age, when that level of volunteerism is just, it's pretty special.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And more women are getting involved in that.
It is.
And leading, which is amazing.
Can I tell you one more thing about
Absolutely.
that? Because I think it really ties in with what you just said with women. So one of the things that I got to experience is the Port Washington Fire Department invited me, Tom McDonough, invited me to go out to Bethpage and do the training that they have to go through. And I will tell you, I thought I understood what volunteer firefighters do, going out and just watching. And, they let me experience a couple different things, put on the gear, put on the pack. I mean, that alone is like 50, 60 pounds. They took me in, we were doing the garden apartments that night. They were training in like a 2-story apartment building. And so the trainers took me in when they lit the fire. I mean, I was scared out of my mind. And can you imagine, once that fire's blazing, that they get in there with all this heavy pack, crawl on the ground, no lights, smoky. So experiencing that, and then the Great Neck Fire Department had me experience, they have a burn trailer. So they had me, again, fully geared up and go in, and they smoked it out. And I was in there 5-10 minutes, and I was like, get me out. So, for women to volunteer in that capacity, God bless them, because one, just the physical component of it is amazing, and two, the fear. I mean, honestly, and I'm pretty brave in life, but that was well beyond what I could do.
Yes, it's amazing what they do. I know that you're very invested in the women's movement and protecting women in domestic violence.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what you've done with that.
So I had the opportunity to get to know some of the senators here on Long Island during my terms in the state Senate. And what I realized was there was some legislation that was being stalled in Albany. So I had the opportunity, and probably the piece of legislation that I'm most proud of, and it's hard to get legislation passed, especially in only one term, a 2-year period of time, and we were able to get this legislation passed. And what it does is it takes firearms away from individuals that are convicted of domestic violence. And there's an interesting statistic that 1 out of every 5 homicides in the United States has a domestic violence component to it. So there is a clear link between, homicide, murder, and domestic violence. So the last thing you want is, if somebody is convicted, that they shouldn't have the right to keep those firearms. So now, and Governor Cuomo signed it into legislation. I carried it in the Senate. Someone carried it in the Assembly. And now there's a procedure in place to remove that firearms. As is, if somebody is wrongly convicted, there's a procedure in place to get your firearms back. And that's only fair, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was truly one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career. So it was great, really great.
But you've done so much more. Like, you try to educate women and to help them get into the workforce. Talk to me about that program that you put together. It was huge. It was at Belmont Racetrack. I mean, what a venue.
It was, and shout out to Belmont for letting us use their facility. So we came up with this idea of how do we help women who may not have the resources to hire someone to write their resume or help write their resume. We, how about women that haven't interviewed for a period of time and don't, again, have the resources to hire someone to coach them and tell them how. We're very fortunate in our communities that, and I'm very fortunate that I have those resources, but not all women do. And it's pretty frightening sometimes to get back into the workforce, As an aside, I'll say, I feel reinventing myself again, post my Senate experience. The first couple of days at work, I was feeling pretty scared, and even at my age and my level of experience. So, and then we realized that there were so many organizations on Long Island that needed skilled workers, and in particular skilled women. So we partnered up with a woman named Rosalie Drago who does workforce development here on Long Island, and she was the moderator, and we went out and we put a team of women together we had the Department of Labor from Washington, D.C., we had unions, we had utilities, somebody from PSE&G, someone from National Grid. We had Northwell represented. We had governments represented, someone from the county represented. We had a woman who has a large childcare, really not one facility, a whole host of different places throughout Long Island. We had Nature's Bounty was there, so corporate America was there, and we got the word out as best as we could. A lot of newspapers, helped promote it, radio, television, Channel 12, public access TV, thank you very much for helping us promote it. And we had about 125 women there, and each of us that were on the panel took about 3-4 minutes just to give a little background of how what was our story. I'm the first in my family to go to college, right? My father died when I was 12. I mean, if it wasn't for Social Security and the generosity of many alumni from my university, I wouldn't have gotten through. So, and many of us had similar type stories. So we did that, and then there was a question and answer, and then we broke out, and there were actually jobs. You could, if you had a resume and you were ready, you could go to one table or different tables that you might have interest in and interview. Then there was a table that just helped you build a resume. Then there was another table. So it was called Avenues of Opportunities. We thought it was a pretty good name. We only held it once because I didn't have the opportunity to do it again. It was my second year, my first term. So, we felt probably, the only negative feedback we got was there weren't enough women. There were more jobs than women there. And it just, if it can never be held again, we'd probably do it on a weekend so more women could show up and, continue the advertising. But it was a great. The other thing I'll bring up, too, is the cost of childcare on Long Island. Mm-hmm. So here you are, woman, you either, want to get back into the workforce, you want to get into the workforce, and you have young children, and you go and you look at these amazing child care facilities, and you realize on average it costs you $1,500 a month. $1,500. So you think about it, your first, whatever, $2,500 that you make, so is going just to child care, right? I mean, $2,000 after taxes is probably less than $1,500 a month. So one of the things we really talked about was doubling the child care tax credit in New York State. And we talked about it 3 years ago when I was first campaigning as a way of not just reaching the, lower income kind of, because most people on Long Island just are, maybe working 1 or 2 jobs just to be able to get by, but they're not considered in that lower income class. So what the doubling of the child tax credit would push it up into a middle class and actually kind of be applicable to more Long Islanders. So I have to say, Governor Cuomo must have heard me, because it was during my first run, and right there, we went in January, in the first budget that I was dealing with, Governor Cuomo put the doubling of the child care tax credit verbatim of what we were talking about in his budget. It passed. Over 1 million New Yorkers qualified and were able to get this doubling of this tax credit. So that was
amazing.
Huge. Yeah,
that's amazing.
That was good. It was good.
I'm sure the working women of New York really appreciate it.
That's it. I mean, how do you afford, right?
It's a major chunk of your paycheck, definitely.
Really is.
That transportation, and then you still have to feed them.
You're right. And at some point, you're always kind of balancing. Does it make sense? And you understand why so many women do choose to stay at home. I mean, one, that's their choice, and that's wonderful, and raise their children, but say they want to go out and work. Well, sometimes it doesn't pay, or they're working to pay for their child care.
Believe me, I felt that.
Yeah, right.
In some cases.
Right.
So you've always been active on boards. I understand that you have now joined another board.
I have, Island Harvest. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. So it was really through my Senate opportunities. I'd always heard about Island Harvest. I think our church participated in various food drives. So when I was elected, their lobbyist brought the executive director, president, I think is her title, and Randy Dresner to Albany, and we met in our office, and I heard the amazing things that the organization does. So Island Harvest is actually the largest distributor of food for people that have food insecurity. And that's the way we call it now. It's food insecurity. And actually, 1 out of every 6 people in the United States, and it's either 1 out of every 5, 1 out of every 6, it's still a staggering number, have some form of food insecurity. And that's right here on Long Island. Island Harvest distributes close to 11 million pounds of food a year, and that is thanks to the generosity of events that just happened this past weekend on Mother's Day, where the letter carriers of America did Stamp Out Food, Stamp Out Hunger, I think it was called, Stamp Out Food, Stamp Out Hunger. And hopefully everyone in our community, I know I was pushing it out on Facebook, put a bag of non-perishable food, and then that food, all the letter carriers pick it up. It gets put into a central area. So here on Long Island, it was Island Harvest. It gets sorted by hundreds of volunteers that come out for the next couple days, and then it gets distributed to various agencies, any entity that distributes food. So Island Harvest does some direct distribution of food, but it really is the source to get the food to those entities, those organizations. And I think we have partnerships with over 400 agencies and different organizations here on Long Island to make sure that people have, food security. So you think about it, go back to this empowering women. So here you are, wanting to get back to work. How do you afford childcare? And then you're worried about where your next meal is going to come from? Or you're a veteran who literally, served our country, and you come back and for whatever reason, maybe there's some medical issues that you're addressing, or maybe you just haven't found the right job yet. And there are a lot of social services to help veterans find jobs, but maybe it just hasn't happened yet. And you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. Shame on us. Shame on us that we can't provide these people. And so, God bless Island Harvest. So when they asked me to join the board, I'm honored to have joined.
That's great.
Yeah.
I know that you did a lot of work also on the opioid crisis.
Right.
I remember as mayor of Flower Hill,
Right.
I think you were aghast when one of the residents
Right.
personally experienced that and didn't realize that it was so prevalent even here in our own backyard, because we hear about it, we hear about people being affected, but it's not in my backyard.
That's right.
But it is in our backyard. So you started actually something during your term as mayor.
Right.
Talk to me about that and how it expanded even further when you went up to the Senate.
Right. So the wake-up call that I got is exactly what you're describing, Elizabeth. I got a call from Nassau County Police on a Monday morning saying, Mayor, you had a resident pass away this weekend from an overdose. And I have to say, I thought, what parent lost their 17 or 18-year-old? But it wasn't. It was a 38-year-old woman that lived in a beautiful home in the village and got addicted to opiates from a back surgery and then just couldn't ever get clean. So I think the lesson I immediately realized that it is very easy, like you're saying, not in my backyard, or it's the young kids that are doing this. Addiction doesn't affect a certain age group, it doesn't affect a certain socioeconomic group, it doesn't affect just a certain racial group, it affects all people. And it is much more prevalent than I think any of us would like to admit. So what we did at the village level is we thought a good way to introduce the problem to the community was to have a family discussion, and I think that's exactly what we called it, a family discussion. So we had law enforcement there, we had treatment providers there, and we had addicts, recovered addicts there. And I remember at the end of the evening, there was a woman that got up in front, and she was talking about how she's a photographer and she's a nurse in the emergency room, and how high stressed. And we thought we were going to hear a story about how many times she has had to recover people that have overdosed. And she said, and I'm an addict. Mm. And the whole room, literally I'm getting chills now, because she was exactly the person who you wouldn't think. She was educated in the medical field, right? Mm-hmm. She was a mom. She was, had a good career, and she was an addict. And actually, she said her son was an addict too, and she was in recovery, and it had been quite a few years, but she still called herself an addict. So to hear that personal story, and I think that's when you really you say, wow, we have a problem So when I had the opportunity or the wherewithal, really, for two different ways, legislatively and through grants, one of the opportunities that you have at the state level is there are various grants that become available, and really your job is to make sure that that money gets back into your community, right? It's tax dollars that we send to Albany, so I viewed part of my job was to get those tax dollars back here. So we were able to get some grant money for some various organizations. Dr. Jeff Reynolds, everyone in this community knows Dr. Reynolds. He's phenomenal, right? CASA was able to get some grant money for CASA, which is a phenomenal organization and what they do really from the grassroots. We were able to hold a forum that our Nassau County District Attorney, various, again, healthcare providers, law enforcement, to talk about what was needed. We were able to pass some legislation that covered addiction treatment longer. We were able to get some legislation passed that requires doctors that if they're going to prescribe an opiate to someone under 17, one, I think now they can only prescribe for 4 days. Two, they have to get the consent of that parent. Because I know I had a daughter that was an athlete and had ACL surgery when she was in high school. And my husband and I both have master's degrees. And that doctor, was doing what he thought was right and, gave us a prescription, and it was for a lot of oxycodone. So, you know what? In order to prevent that, now the parents have to approve.
Well, one of the passions that I know that you had, which you told me started 23 years ago, was you getting in shape and joining the local karate studio, Kwan's,
Yep.
which I know, being a member there myself, why you have that passion. Talk
Right.
to me about what has changed in your life after you joined there.
Right. So we've really had a theme of kind of women empowerment throughout this interview. So thank you, because it's an important issue. And, it's just another way. 23 years ago, after I had my second of 3 children, I realized I needed some exercise, and I was commuting into the city. So I thought, what about some self-defense? So I started at Kwan's Karate right here in Manhasset. And, it's truly now a huge part of my life. We say it's a traditional Korean martial art, and we say, you start out and learn the punches and the kicks and kind of the physical part of it, and then you learn the more internal part of it and how breath and how that energy flows. But as you go up and become more senior, you learn about the spiritual part of martial arts, about humility and honesty and concentration and all characteristics that we want to live our daily lives with, right? Humility and honesty and caring about individuals. So, I'm a 5th degree black belt. I hope I'm humble about that. But, I can protect myself, but more importantly, it's how do I spread the art and how do I empower children and women and men too, in what I do in life. So thank you for asking about it.
And thank you for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you will consider coming back in the future.
I'd love to. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks for watching From the Source. Tune in next time for more in-depth interviews with members of your community.